Hello and welcome to Projector, and whether you like it or not, the Smurfs are back in an all-star animated reboot. In Smurf Village, every Smurf has a role that defines them, except for No Name, voiced by James Corden, who is struggling to find his thing. But Papa Smurf, voiced by John Goodman, is abducted by evil wizard Razmel and his brother Gargamel, both voiced by J.P. Carliak, who is searching for the magic book Jaunty, voiced by Amy Sedaris, the last one he doesn't possess that will help him destroy all good in the universe. Smurfette, voiced by Rihanna, leads the Smurfs into the real world to find him, with the aid of Papa's brother Ken, voiced by Nick Offerman, and No Name might find his purpose after all. Created in 1958, Peo Smurfs have had quite a long history on the big and small screen. There was a film in 1965 which was basically a collection of shorts, there was the Smurfs and the Magic Flute from the 70s, and of course, the 80s television series. But when people think of the Smurfs these days, they're probably thinking of the ones made by Sony, particularly the animated live-action hybrid films, both directed by Raja Gosnell, which were absolutely terrible. When people think of bad, obnoxious kids films filled with lazy fart jokes and people getting hit in the nuts, yeah, that's precisely what those Smurfs movies are. One of the very few redeeming qualities about them is Hank Azaria's performance as Gargamel, who is completely going for broke, so much so that you kind of feel a sense of second-hand embarrassment for him. The last Smurfs movie that Sony made, the fully animated The Lost Village, which I actually reviewed at the time, was a big improvement on those films. It wasn't a great movie, but it was certainly far closer to the spirit of Peo's comics, and meant to be an empowering story aimed at young girls with the tribe of Smurf women, with big name voices like Julia Roberts and Michelle Rodriguez. Unfortunately, The Lost Village did far worse at the box office than the live action films. I would argue that those movies may have made a lot of money, but they have harmed the Smurfs brand, because having seen them, just hearing the word Smurf makes my soul want to exit out of my body. Now, Paramount has attained the rights to the characters, so naturally we've got a reboot, which is intended to be the first in a new franchise, because of course it is. This new Smurfs, no "the" in the title, is directed by Chris Miller. No, not the one that works with Phil Lord, the other one, who has done a lot of work for DreamWorks Animation, particularly Shrek. He was the voice of the Magic Mirror, he directed the third film, and the first Puss in Boots. It's kind of a bit of a Joel Cohen situation when you think about it. And it's written by Pam Brady, who worked with Matt Stone and Trey Parker on South Park and Team America, but most recently she's been doing family films like Ruby Gilman and the upcoming SpongeBob film Search for SquarePants. Speaking of SpongeBob, there's actually a short film attached to Smurfs called Order Up, where SpongeBob annoys Squidward with the order bell. Apparently this was produced around 2011 or 2012, but was never actually released until now for whatever reason, which is just very odd, because it's a completely dialogue-free bit of slapstick and very brief, and seems to have just been added to bump Smurfs over the 90-minute mark. But anyway, back to Smurfs. You look at the talent involved, and it does seem like there was a concerted effort here to try and make a better movie than the live-action Sony ones, and the sad part is, they've made something which really isn't all that superior, and at times isn't even all that different to what came before. I'll start with the strengths, and that here is the animation. I quite like the art style in this movie, the mix of 3D with 2D looking elements. It's very reminiscent of something like the Peanuts movie. So you got these CG characters that are shaded to look flat, but their expressions in particular, like their eyes and mouths and the very occasional speech bubble, have this very hand-drawn look about them, and it all feels very in keeping with the original comics. A lot of the animation is very bright and lively and colourful, especially when the Smurfs are travelling between dimensions. Honestly, at times, it feels like it's mostly an excuse for the animators to just show off their stuff, and there are sequences in isolation that are quite impressive. During the climax of the movie, there's a section where Razmel follows No Name and Smurfette into different dimensions, and you get all these different scenes where the art style changes. So you got a scene in 8-bit as a side-scrolling platform, you got a bit where they become crude drawings on lined paper, and there's even a bit where they become Japanese anime. It's all very Spider-Verse, but those minutes were probably some of the best in the entire movie and gave me a couple of laughs. Maybe that should have been the concept for the entire movie, because those few minutes show way more invention and fun than most of the other 70 or so. It definitely looks most visually cohesive in the scenes set in Smurf Village, but again they turn this into a live action hybrid, so when the Smurfs enter into the real world, they have a more three-dimensional shading and look about them. Although even this is significantly more appealing than how they looked in the Sony films though, where they tried to make them photoreal, but they just looked uncanny and rubbery, that kind of strange mixture of big animated features and realistic skin textures. Ugh, it was just creepy. At least the 2025 version remembers their cartoon characters and treats them as such. But doing a live-action hybrid movie is an own goal if you're trying to differentiate this from what came before, because it does feel reminiscent of those movies in these parts, particularly the scenes set in Paris, which was where the Smurfs 2 was set. But in execution, it's also completely pointless. The reason the Sony films did that was because they had a live-action cast for the Smurfs to interact with, which is not the case for the 2025 film. There is no Neil Patrick Harris here. In fact, there's no major live-action human characters at all. They're just all background extras that the Smurfs interact around and try to avoid being seen by. So you're just wondering, why have they bothered to do this? Why go to the effort of filming live-action background plates when you could just make the entire movie animated, because they never interact with anyone? Heck, the sequence where the Smurfs end up in the Australian outback is mostly, if not completely computer generated anyway, just made to look photoreal, so why not just make the whole movie like that with CG humans? Not to mention this creates some truly baffling logic. There's a scene where the Smurfs have to sneak into Razmel's castle, which for some strange reason is in the middle of an autobahn on the outskirts of Munich. So they get a delivery driver to send food to the castle, and that delivery motorcyclist is live action footage. But the inside of Razmel's castle is totally animated, and that includes him and his human staff, like a butler and his trainee henchman Joel, voiced by Dan Levy. So what, is there like an animated force field around this castle? The approach is wildly inconsistent, and it creates some truly bewildering holes that make absolutely no sense if you even stop to think about it for literally a split second. And that's the thing, you look past all the whiz-bang pop and all the stuff that's designed to distract the kids, and the story is an absolute wisp, even by the standards of things aimed at younger viewers. There are 20-minute Saturday morning cartoons that have more depth than this film has at feature length. The story wants to bring the Smurfs back to the adventure stories that make up their comics, but there's so little tying any of it together, and it's constantly moving to try and hide that fact. They zip around from Paris to Australia to Munich on little more than Mad Libs logic. We need to find Papa's brother Ken and he's hiding in a disco ball. Wait, why is he hiding in a disco ball in the middle of a nightclub? I don't know. But the whole movie is kind of like that disco ball in a way, just glittery and shiny, but completely hollow. It's a movie that vastly underestimates the attention span of small children, that if they even let up a little, they'll get restless, and I don't think that's true. Kids don't need distraction, they just want to be engaged, just like everyone else, and they'll lose interest if they aren't. And what's unfortunate is that there's glimpses of a bit more substance that it never capitalises on. The heart of the story is meant to be James Corden's No Name, a Smurf that hasn't found his identity. He doesn't know what his role is. Clearly the Smurfs aren't in need of an annoying talk show host. But you could easily make this into a metaphor for anxiety or loneliness, things that would connect with viewers of all ages, but especially younger ones who could relate to it. It's a very common theme in kids media, but that's because everyone learns what they're good at, learns what they're passionate about, that sense of self and identity. There's genuinely something in that concept, and Corden even gets a big plaintive musical number early on called Always on the Outside that's so out of place amongst the rest of the soundtrack, it's almost like it's straight out of a completely different film entirely. But the big problem is that most of his character's journey is done in the first 5 minutes. Very early on into it, he suggests, what if he was into magic? Oh, no, there's never been a magic Smurf before. Smurfs can't do magic or something, but sure enough, he develops magic powers. So most of the film isn't actually him finding his purpose, it's more just having the confidence to believe he can do it and use his abilities, which is a bit less interesting. But you can clearly see what they're taking inspiration from. They want to be the Lego Movie, and the hyperactive and self-aware humour often feels like they're trying to be Lord and Miller, the other Chris Miller. And No Name is the equivalent of Chris Pratt's Emmett, who becomes the special but can't figure out why when he's so generic and ordinary. But the difference is that his purpose wasn't obvious at the outset, and also that Chris Pratt is way more charming and likeable than James Corden. No Name should have also been the main character, but he ends up competing for focus with Smurfette, voiced by Rihanna, continuing the tradition of the character being voiced by pop stars following Katy Perry and Demi Lovato, and Rihanna is also a producer on this. If you've seen Battleship, you'll know that Rihanna isn't much of an actor, and she's also not much of a voice actor either. She was previously in Home, where she was passable if a bit miscast voicing a kid with her very husky voice, but she's so much more expressive when she's singing than when she's delivering lines, which often sound a bit flat. She's not putting enough of her personality into it, and it makes her dialogue monotone, which is a problem when she's trying to deliver jokes. But the script also botches her character too. If you're familiar with your Smurfs lore, and I'll forgive you if you aren't, you'll be aware that Smurfette, the only girl in the village, although not the only female Smurf we meet in the film, was created from clay by Gargamel as basically a honeypot, but she was turned good. But the film very cack-handedly explains this in some early dialogue, almost paraphrased exactly as I just said it. You could very easily tie this into the theme of identity and finding one's place, and the idea of not letting your past define who you are. Admittedly, that was a big part of the Sony films, especially the second one and The Lost Village, but they could have easily mirrored that into the arc with No Name, but they mostly just bring it up to quickly set up some tension later on as to whether or not she's working with Razamel, which we know that she isn't and is only playing along to trick him, so there isn't any. It's just messy and poorly implemented. On a related note, it also isn't even that much for a musical. Now that might be sweet relief to some, but this was originally titled The Smurfs Musical, but they appear to have dropped that once they realised there was only 3 or 4 songs actually sung by the characters during the film. All the other songs, including a terrible cover of Higher Love, just play out on the soundtrack. You cast Rihanna as your lead, and then you only give her one song to sing, and that song, Friend of Mine, where Smurfette consoles No Name, is a rare moment where the movie stops to breathe, but then it turns out the plot has happened off screen during the musical number because Razmel has attacked and abducted the other Smurfs. The fact that a major plot point occurs while Smurfette and No Name are bouncing around in kangaroo pouches sounds like it should be a joke, but it isn't presented as one. It's just another example of the poor focus and storytelling. Would have been nice to have actually seen that on screen, perhaps. And again, it's clear that another movie they were taking inspiration from was the Trolls films, especially the opening dance number introducing the characters Everything Goes with Blue. That's sound fashion advice from my experience, but that musical number could have easily come from one of those films. But Smurfs doesn't really have the surreal or frankly downright weird sensibility those films have, especially their sense of humour. Yes, that's right, I found myself yearning for the sophistication of the Trolls films. That's really saying something. And I keep pointing out all these other animated films it wants to be, but it's rather ironic for a film that's about identity that it struggles to create one of its own. You know what else it's trying to be? A superhero movie of sorts. It's funny that it opens hot on the heels of James Gunn's Superman, because these other blue things with an S seems to be trying to do something similar to that film by making kindness into a superpower. Needless to say, not quite as successfully. We not only meet the International Neighbourhood Watch Smurfs in Paris, a group of ninjas led by Sandra Oh's Moxie, who then promptly leave the film 5 minutes later, but we also discover that the Smurfs are the Guardian Ears of Good, or some such thing. It all feels like it's trying too hard, not helped by the fact that it's tied into some overly convoluted backstory involving these magic books that John Goodman's Papa Smurf and his brothers, Ken and Ron, voiced by Nick Offerman and Kurt Russell, fought to protect. Yes, you did hear that correctly. Kurt Russell shows up for a few minutes as Papa's long-lost brother with hippie Rapunzel hair. Why couldn't we have had an entire movie of those three? Talk about threatening me with a good time. And yeah, this has the most bizarrely eclectic voice cast in recent memory, so parents can sit through the credits and be astonished at the people who show up for maybe 3-4 lines. Jimmy Kimmel turns up very late into the proceedings. There's an evil council of space wizards voiced by Octavia Spencer, Hannah Waddingham and Nick Kroll, who could have easily been totally written out. Probably the best value in the cast is Natasha Lyonne, who voices Mama Poot, the leader of these squiggly, cake-chomping kleptomaniacs called Snooterpoot, and her very distinctive line deliveries provided most of the laughs for me. It runs on fear. Why? I don't know. It's also worth briefly knowing the UK version replaces some of the bit part Smurf voices with local celebrities like John Richardson, Ryland Clark and Giovanna Fletcher, a stunt that never stops being pointless at best and kind of annoying at worst. Luckily, they're not too distracting, but maybe they could have bothered to at least update the film's end credits with the actors they replaced, including the director. But a lot of these faults could have been forgiven if Smurfs was funny, but it has more whiffs than a farting convention. I saw this in a screen with quite a few families in it, and you wanna know how many times the kids laughed? Not once. Stone silence throughout. Credit for being well behaved, I guess, but most of the polite chuckles came from me, and I don't think I'm the target audience, the guy sat at the back trying not to look too embarrassed that he's having to watch this for work. Even the gags for the adults aren't good. The scenes with Gargamel and Razmel are all jokes about Zoom calls, blocked emails and LinkedIn. They're boring jokes for bored adults. Of the Smurfs movies made in the last 15 years, The Lost Village remains the best one, and this does come in second, but that's mostly because the other live action films are absolutely dismal and not because this derivative reboot is all that good. But it does feel like a missed opportunity somewhat to make something surprisingly good, especially with all that talent involved. The best I can say for Smurfs is that coming out of the screening I thought, could have been worse. Talk about damning with faint praise. Mostly, it's like eating an entire bag of Haribo Smurf sweets in one go. Sickly, and may have laxative effects. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page, or my YouTube Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can go smurfing wild over at my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and subscribe, it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.